I guess you could say I'm just a regular guy with a regular life. My name is David, and I've been married to Rachel for a little over a year now. To be honest, I still feel like the luckiest man alive every time I wake up and see her beside me. She's smart, kind, beautiful, and the kind of person who makes everything around her feel lighter, like the world is just easier when she's in it. From the moment we met, she had this way of making me feel like I could do anything, and when we said our vows, I meant every single word. I run a small car parts business that keeps me busy, but not overly so. It's just enough to make me feel like I'm doing something meaningful, while still giving me plenty of time to spend with Rachel. She works from home as a financial analyst, a fancy way of saying she's really good with numbers. Honestly, I don't understand half of what she does, but it's impressive. She's the kind of person who could probably balance the country's budget while sipping her morning coffee. Life has been good to us. We've fallen into this comfortable rhythm where everything just clicks. We wake up, share breakfast, and then dive into our respective days. Evenings are my favorite, though. We cook together. Well, Rachel cooks and I pretend to help, and then we either watch something on TV or sit on the patio, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes we laugh until our sides hurt. Other times, we just enjoy the quiet. Now, I'd be lying if I said there weren't any challenges. Marriage isn't some fairy tale where everything is always perfect, and we're no exception. We've had our disagreements, who doesn't? But we've always managed to work through them. What's different about Rachel and me, though, is how much we value each other. We don't let petty arguments linger. We talk things out, even if it's uncomfortable. One of the more interesting parts of being married to Rachel is navigating her social circle. Don't get me wrong. I like that she has her own group of friends. They're important to her, and by extension, they're important to me. But if I'm being completely honest, her friends can be a bit much. They're a tight-knit group, and I always feel like the outsider looking in when we're together. They've known Rachel for years, and I'm just the husband. There's one friend in particular who stands out, Lisa. She's the ringleader, the one who sets the tone for the group. If Lisa's in a good mood, everyone's laughing and having a great time. If she's not, the entire dynamic shifts, and the evening feels like walking on eggshells. She's got this air about her, like she's always in control, always one step ahead of everyone else. It's not that she's outright mean. Well, not at first. But there's a subtlety to her that makes you feel like you're being judged, even when she's smiling at you. Despite the occasional tension, I've tried my best to fit in. I know how much Rachel values her friendships, and I don't want to be the reason she feels torn. So, I show up at the dinners, the brunches, the gatherings. I smile, I make small talk, and I laugh at jokes that aren't all that funny. It's not always easy, but for Rachel, it's worth it. At least that's what I thought. Looking back, maybe I should have trusted my instincts a bit more. Maybe I should have paid closer attention to the subtle ways Lisa would test the waters, the little digs disguised as compliments, the way she'd dominate conversations and steer them in directions that left me feeling like an afterthought. But at the time, I shrugged it off. I told myself it didn't matter because Rachel and I were happy, and that's all that counted. If only I'd known what was coming. If only I'd seen the storm brewing on the horizon. They say hindsight is 20/20, and in this case, they're absolutely right. What started as a seemingly innocent dinner invitation would turn out to be a moment that tested everything. My patience, my pride, and my marriage. But I'll get to that soon enough. For now, just know this. Life was good. Better than good. It was the kind of life you don't want to take for granted, the kind of life you fight to protect. And that's exactly what I was about to do, even if I didn't realize it yet. I remember the day Rachel mentioned the dinner like it was yesterday. It was a typical Tuesday evening, one of those quiet nights when nothing out of the ordinary was expected. I had just come home from work, exhausted but content, and Rachel was in the kitchen prepping a salad while humming along to some pop song playing on the radio. It was one of those moments that made me appreciate how simple and wonderful life could be. "Hey, David," she said, her voice light and casual. "Lisa and the girls are organizing a dinner at Lobby this Friday. You know, that fancy French place downtown? They said we should come." I paused, the TV remote halfway to my hand. "We?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Usually, Rachel's group outings didn't involve me unless it was a major event like a birthday or an anniversary party. Yes, she replied, laughing at my expression. Apparently, Lisa insisted. She said it's been a while since you joined us, and she thought it would be nice for you to spend some time with the group. You've been working so hard lately. You deserve a nice evening out. There it was, the first red flag. Lisa insisting on my presence? That didn't sit right with me. Lisa wasn't exactly known for her inclusive attitude, especially when it came to me. She'd always been polite enough, but I could tell she didn't think much of me. I didn't come from the same privileged background as most of Rachel's friends, and while Rachel never cared about that, Lisa's subtle comments over the years had made her feelings crystal clear. Still, I didn't want to make a fuss. Sure, I said, shrugging. Why not? It might be nice to see everyone. Rachel smiled, clearly pleased. Great. It's at 7 p.m. Oh, and Lisa mentioned it's going to be a little more formal than usual, so maybe wear your navy suit. You know, the one that makes you look like a movie star. I laughed at her attempt to butter me up but agreed. The suit was fine, and honestly, the thought of Rachel beaming at me all night made the idea of the dinner a little less daunting. The rest of the week passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling in the back of my mind. Something about the invitation didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way Rachel had casually dropped Lisa's name as if that alone was supposed to convince me, or maybe it was just my gut telling me that this night wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. Friday arrived, and as we got ready, Rachel seemed genuinely excited. She picked out a stunning green dress that made her look radiant, and I couldn't help but feel proud to have her by my side. You're going to knock them dead, I said as we got into the car. She just smiled and squeezed my hand. We arrived at La Vie a little before 7 p.m. The restaurant was everything you'd expect from a high-end French establishment. Dim lighting, soft classical music playing in the background, and waiters who looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. Rachel's friends were already seated at a table near the center of the room, laughing and chatting like they owned the place. As we approached, I noticed something odd. The table was set for 8 people, and every seat was taken. I did a quick count to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Nope. 8 people, 8 seats. And Rachel and I made 10. Lisa spotted us and waved us over, her smile wide and full of something I couldn't quite place. David. Rachel. So glad you could make it, she called out. Rachel stepped forward, returning Lisa's hug while I lingered awkwardly behind. Lisa, I said, motioning to the table. I think there's been a mix-up. There's no seat for me. Lisa tilted her head, her smile never wavering. Oh, didn't Rachel tell you? We only reserved for 8. But don't worry. I'm sure the staff can bring over an extra chair for you. The way she said it, so casual, like I was an afterthought, sent a chill down my spine. Rachel looked flustered, glancing between me and Lisa as if trying to figure out how to fix the situation. I didn't realize, she stammered. I thought. Lisa cut her off. It's no big deal. David can sit on the end. Or, if it's easier, he can wait at the bar while we catch up. This is really more of a girl's thing anyway. There it was, the second red flag. I could feel my blood start to boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. I glanced at Rachel, hoping she'd step in and say something, anything, to defend me. But she just looked away, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Don't worry about it, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'll sort it out. I stepped away from the table, letting the humiliation sink in as I walked toward the bar. But as I took a seat and ordered a drink, one thought kept repeating in my mind. This wasn't just a mix-up. This was intentional, and I wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. Let me tell you, sitting at the bar wasn't how I imagined that evening going. There I was, sipping a whiskey I didn't really want, while Rachel and her friends laughed and chatted a few feet away. From where I sat, I could see everything. The carefully laid table, the sparkling wine glasses, and of course, the 8 chairs filled with people who seemed perfectly content to pretend I didn't exist. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't angry. I was furious. But more than that, I was confused. What was the point of inviting me if there wasn't even a place for me at the table? It didn't take a genius to figure out this wasn't some innocent mistake. No, this was planned, probably by Lisa. And what stung the most wasn't even her audacity. It was Rachel's silence. From the moment we arrived, she hadn't said a word to defend me. Sure, she looked uncomfortable, maybe even embarrassed, but she hadn't stood up for me. Not once. That hit harder than any of Lisa's passive-aggressive comments ever could. As I sat there, I replayed the scene over and over in my mind. Lisa's smug smile. The way she dismissed me like I was some accessory Rachel had accidentally brought along. "It's more of a girl's thing anyway," she'd said, as if I didn't belong. And the others? Not a single one of them had the decency to speak up. They just sat there, laughing at Lisa's jokes, sipping their overpriced wine, and pretending they hadn't just witnessed something incredibly rude. I watched as the waiter brought out the first course, a plate of something small and fancy that looked more like art than food. Lisa was in her element, commanding the conversation with her usual flair. She was leaning into her role as the queen bee of the group, throwing out stories about her latest vacation and name-dropping people I'd never heard of, but was supposed to be impressed by. Rachel, on the other hand, looked out of place. She laughed at the right moments and nodded along, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was subtle, but I knew her well enough to see it. She wasn't comfortable. She didn't belong there any more than I did. Eventually, the bartender wandered over, probably sensing I wasn't in the best mood. "Can I get you anything else?" he asked, his tone polite but professional. I shook my head. "I'm good, thanks." But I wasn't good. Not at all. I couldn't stop thinking about how this whole situation made me feel, like I was some sort of outsider in my own marriage. Rachel and I were supposed to be a team. We'd promised each other that. And yet, here I was, sitting on the sidelines while she sat at that table with people who clearly didn't respect me, or her, for that matter. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about me. It was about Rachel too. Lisa's little stunt wasn't just a dig at me. It was a power play. She wanted to remind Rachel, and probably everyone else, that she was in charge. That her opinion mattered more than anyone else's. And Rachel? She let it happen. Maybe not consciously, but by not standing up for me, or herself, she'd given Lisa exactly what she wanted. I took another sip of my drink, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. I wanted to march over to that table, pull Rachel aside, and demand to know why she hadn't done anything. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. It would just make things worse. So, I waited. The main course came and went. From where I sat, I could hear snippets of the conversation. Lisa was talking about some gala she'd attended, going into great detail about the designer dress she'd worn and the exclusive crowd she'd mingled with. It was all so shallow, so performative. I couldn't help but wonder what Rachel saw in these people. They weren't her equals, not really. Rachel was genuine, kind, and down to earth. She didn't need to prove her worth with designer clothes or exclusive dinner reservations. So why was she trying so hard to fit into their world? By the time dessert rolled around, I'd had enough. I put down my empty glass and made my way back to the table. As I approached, the laughter died down, and all eyes turned to me. "David," Lisa said, her voice dripping with faux surprise. "We were wondering where you'd gone. You missed such a lovely dinner." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "I didn't go anywhere, Lisa. I've been sitting at the bar all night. But thanks for noticing." Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Well, I hope you enjoyed yourself. It's such a shame we couldn't squeeze you in." I nodded, my gaze steady. "It's funny, isn't it? How there was enough room for 8 people, but not 9. Rachel's face turned red, and she opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand. "It's fine. I'm not upset. I just wanted to say goodbye before I left. Rachel, I'll see you at home." And with that, I turned and walked out. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt a mix of anger and relief. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Things couldn't stay the way they were. Something had to change. I drove home that night in silence, the tension from the dinner sitting heavily on my chest. I didn't want to explode in front of Rachel when she got home, so I decided to take a walk to clear my head. Fresh air sometimes helped me think, though this time, all it did was make me replay the evening over and over. Lisa's smug face, her condescending tone, the way she said, "It's such a shame we couldn't squeeze you in." It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. She wanted to send a message. I didn't belong. And the worst part? Rachel had just let it happen. When Rachel finally walked through the door later that night, I could tell she was uneasy. She hesitated in the doorway like she wasn't sure whether to approach me or give me space. I decided to let her speak first. "I'm sorry about tonight," she said softly, setting her purse down on the counter. I didn't realize Lisa would pull something like that. I turned to look at her, raising an eyebrow. "You didn't realize? Really? Rachel? This is Lisa we're talking about." Her shoulders slumped. I know she can be difficult, but I didn't think she'd do something so petty. I didn't know what to say without making a scene. I let out a humorless laugh. "A scene? Rachel, she humiliated me in front of everyone. And you were worried about making a scene?" She flinched at my tone, and for a moment, I regretted snapping. But the frustration bubbling inside me was too much to ignore. "Rachel, I'm your husband. We're supposed to have each other's backs, but tonight, I felt like I was on my own. Lisa might have been the one pulling the strings, but you let it happen. Do you realize how that feels?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, clearly at a loss for words. After a long pause, she finally said, "I didn't mean to make you feel like that. I just didn't know how to handle it. Lisa, she's been a part of my life for so long, and sometimes it's easier to just let her win." "Let her win?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "Rachel, this isn't a game. This is our marriage. If you let people like Lisa walk all over us, it doesn't just hurt me, it hurts us. Do you even see that?" She didn't answer. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I've been so afraid of losing them that I didn't think about what it's costing me. That caught me off guard." "Losing them?" She nodded. "Lisa, the group, all of it. I've known them for so long, and they've always been, well, they've always been there. Even when they're difficult, even when Lisa acts the way she does, they're still a big part of my life. But tonight, I saw it differently. I saw how it affected you, and I realized," she trailed off, looking down at her hands. "I realized that maybe I've been holding on to the wrong things." Her words softened some of my anger, but they didn't erase it. "Rachel," I said, my tone firm but calm, "I get that Lisa's been a part of your life for a long time, but that doesn't give her the right to treat me, or you, like we're less than her. And it doesn't mean you have to keep letting it slide. You're better than that. We're better than that." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, David. I really am. I'll talk to Lisa. I'll make it clear that this can't happen again." I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Words were easy, action was harder. But for now, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, Rachel wasn't the enemy here. Lisa was. And if Rachel was willing to take a stand, maybe we could finally put this whole mess behind us. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa wasn't done yet. People like her never were. She thrived on control, on making others feel small, and something told me she wasn't going to let this go without a fight. And I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. So, I waited. I watched. And I prepared myself for whatever came next. Because if Lisa wanted a battle, I was ready. But she wasn't going to drag Rachel, or me, down without a fight. I don't know what it was, but something shifted in me after that conversation with Rachel. Maybe it was the raw honesty in her voice, or maybe it was the way she admitted her fear of losing people who didn't deserve her loyalty. Whatever it was, it made me realize that I needed to stay calm, steady, and focused. If Lisa wanted to play games, I wasn't going to stoop to her level, but I also wasn't going to let her humiliate me again. Rachel said she'd talk to Lisa, but I didn't put much stock in that. Not because I didn't trust Rachel, I did, but because I knew Lisa too well by now. She wasn't the kind of person who backed down easily. She thrived on control, on manipulation, and most of all on attention. And if there was one thing she hated more than anything, it was losing her grip on someone she thought she owned. So, instead of dwelling on what might happen, I decided to observe. I wanted to see how far Lisa would go, how deep her need for control really ran. I wanted to understand her game, not just for my sake, but for Rachel's too. The first real test came a few days later when Rachel mentioned another dinner party. This one wasn't as formal as the last, but Lisa would be there, along with the rest of the group. Rachel seemed nervous when she brought it up, like she was bracing for me to say no. "Do you want to come?" she asked, her voice tentative. "I understand if you don't. After what happened last time." I looked at her for a moment, trying to gauge what she really wanted. Was she asking me to come because she thought it would help, or because she felt guilty? Either way, I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She wanted me there, but she was afraid of what might happen. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'll come." Rachel looked surprised. "You will?" "Of course," I said, giving her a small smile. "I'm not going to let Lisa, or anyone else, make me feel unwelcome. Besides, you're my wife. Where you go, I go." Her face softened, and for the first time in days, she looked genuinely relieved. "Thank you, David. That means a lot to me." The night of the dinner, I decided to approach things differently. I wasn't going to sit back and let Lisa control the narrative this time. Instead, I was going to observe, to watch how she interacted with everyone. Not just me, but the whole group. From the moment we arrived, it was clear that Lisa was in her element. She greeted everyone like she was hosting the event herself, even though the dinner was at another friend's house. Her laughter rang out across the room, loud and deliberate, drawing attention to herself at every opportunity. When Rachel and I walked in, Lisa's eyes lit up, not with warmth, but with something sharper, more calculating. She greeted Rachel with a hug, then turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "David," she said, her tone overly sweet. "So good to see you again. I'm glad you decided to join us." "Thanks for having me," I replied, matching her tone. "It's always a pleasure." The subtle tension between us was almost tangible, but I kept my cool. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten under my skin. As the evening went on, I started to notice little things. The way Lisa would steer the conversation back to herself whenever someone else tried to talk. The way she'd throw in backhanded compliments, like telling Rachel, "You're so lucky David doesn't mind these kinds of events." Most men would hate being dragged along to something so fancy. I also noticed how the others responded to her. Some of them laughed nervously at her jokes, while others avoided eye contact altogether. It was clear that Lisa's dominance wasn't just about me. It was about the entire group. She thrived on their discomfort, on their unwillingness to challenge her. But what stood out the most was Rachel. She was quieter than usual, more reserved. She didn't laugh as much, and when she did, it felt forced. I could see her glancing at me every now and then, as if checking to make sure I was okay. By the time dessert was served, I'd learned everything I needed to know. Lisa wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was trying to control Rachel too. She wanted to remind Rachel that she was the alpha, the one who called the shots. And in doing so, she was testing Rachel's loyalty. It was a game I'd seen before, but this time, I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her manipulate Rachel into choosing between me and her so-called friends. When the night finally ended, Rachel and I walked to the car in silence. Once we were inside, she turned to me, her expression filled with worry. "How was it?" she asked hesitantly. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "It was enlightening." She frowned. "Enlightening?" I nodded. "Yeah, I saw exactly what Lisa's trying to do. And Rachel, it's not just about me. It's about you too. She wants to control you, to keep you in her orbit. But you don't have to let her. You're stronger than that." Rachel didn't say anything right away, but I could see the gears turning in her mind. For the first time, I felt like she was starting to see things the way I did. And that was a start. As we drove home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve. Lisa might have been playing her games, but I wasn't going to let her win. Not with Rachel. Not with me. Not with us. By the time the next dinner invitation came around, I was ready. I had spent enough time observing, watching Lisa's games unfold, and seeing how Rachel struggled to navigate the delicate balance between her marriage and her long-standing friendships. I decided that this time, things were going to be different. This time, I wouldn't let Lisa's little power plays go unanswered. Rachel brought it up one evening after dinner. She seemed hesitant, like she was walking on eggshells, and I could already guess why. "David," she began, her voice careful, "Lisa and the others are planning another dinner this weekend. It's at the new Italian place downtown. She asked if we'd like to come." I put down my coffee and looked at her. "She asked if we would like to come?" I repeated, emphasizing the we. Rachel nodded. "Yes, she did. I mean, I know how things have been lately, but maybe this is her way of trying to make amends." I raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Lisa? Make amends? Rachel, let's be honest here. That's not her style." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, but maybe if we go, things will be different. I don't want there to be tension anymore." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. I realized that Rachel wasn't just trying to appease Lisa. She was trying to protect our relationship from the strain Lisa was putting on it. And while part of me wanted to refuse, to avoid another evening of humiliation, I knew that staying home wasn't the answer. If we were going to move past this, we had to face it together. "All right," I said finally. "We'll go. But if Lisa pulls anything, I'm not going to sit there and take it. Agreed?" Rachel nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. "Agreed. And thank you, David. I really appreciate it." When Saturday night rolled around, I dressed the part. A tailored suit, polished shoes, the works. If Lisa wanted to judge me, I'd give her nothing to work with. Rachel looked stunning in a deep red dress, and as we walked into the restaurant together, I felt a renewed sense of determination. This was my turning point. I wasn't just there to observe anymore. I was there to make it clear that I wouldn't be pushed around. The restaurant was elegant, all soft lighting and marble accents. Lisa and the group were already seated when we arrived, their laughter filling the space. As soon as Lisa saw us, she waved us over with that same too bright smile that always set my teeth on edge. "David, Rachel, so glad you could join us," she said, standing to give Rachel a quick hug. She turned to me with a smirk. "And David, I see you've dressed for the occasion. Very sharp." "Thanks, Lisa," I said evenly. Figured I'd rise to the level of the company I'm keeping. Her smirk faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Well, you've certainly made an effort." We took our seats, and the evening began. At first, things were surprisingly civil. Lisa kept the conversation light, steering clear of her usual digs. I wondered if Rachel had actually gotten through to her, or if she was just waiting for the right moment to strike. It didn't take long to find out. Midway through the second course, Lisa leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine glass as she spoke. "You know, Rachel," she began, her tone casual but pointed, "it's so wonderful that you and David can come to these events. It must be nice for him to experience something a bit upscale." There it was, the first jab of the night, wrapped in a thin layer of civility. I glanced at Rachel, whose cheeks had turned pink, but before she could respond, I decided to take control. "It is nice," I said, keeping my tone light. "But then again, upscale is all about perspective, isn't it? For some people, it's about the food and the atmosphere. For others, it's about how they treat the people around them." The table went quiet for a moment, and Lisa's smile froze in place. "Well," she said after a beat, "I suppose we all have our own definitions." We moved on, but the tension lingered. Lisa's jabs became subtler as the night went on, but each time, I countered them with calm, measured responses. I wasn't rude or confrontational, just firm enough to make it clear that I wasn't the easy target she thought I was. By the time dessert arrived, the balance of power at the table had shifted. Lisa was still trying to maintain her usual dominance, but it wasn't working. The others were less engaged with her and more interested in the conversation Rachel and I were having. For the first time, I felt like we weren't just enduring the evening, we were reclaiming it. As we left the restaurant that night, Rachel squeezed my hand. "You were amazing," she said quietly. "I don't know how you stayed so calm." I shrugged, a small smile playing on my lips. "Because it's not about fighting, Rachel. It's about showing people like Lisa that they don't have as much power as they think they do." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You're right, and I think she knows it now." I didn't respond, but I couldn't help feeling a sense of satisfaction. Lisa might not have admitted defeat, but I could tell she felt it. This was the turning point I'd been waiting for, and I wasn't about to let her regain the upper hand. Not now. Not ever. The next time Lisa came into my life, she upped the stakes. This wasn't just another dinner or casual gathering. No, this time, she went for the grand gesture, one she thought would solidify her control over Rachel and humiliate me in the process. What she didn't realize was that I'd been waiting for this moment. It all started when Rachel told me Lisa was hosting a special dinner at L'Olivo, one of the most exclusive Italian restaurants in the city. The way Rachel described it, you'd think it was a royal gala. Lisa had apparently gone all out, arranging a private dining room and inviting a hand-picked group of her closest friends. I wasn't surprised when Rachel hesitated to bring it up. "She wants us to come," Rachel said one evening, her voice careful. "Well, she specifically said she wants you to come." I set down my coffee and looked at her, waiting for more. "She said it's her way of making peace," Rachel continued, avoiding my gaze. She thought a small, private dinner might be better than a big group setting. I raised an eyebrow. Lisa wants to make peace? Or Lisa wants to stage another performance? Rachel bit her lip, unsure how to respond. "I don't know, David. Maybe both. But I think it's worth giving her a chance." I could hear the hope in Rachel's voice, and while my gut told me Lisa wasn't done playing games, I agreed. Not because I believed Lisa had suddenly turned over a new leaf, but because I knew it was time to put an end to this once and for all. The night of the dinner, Rachel and I arrived at L'Olivo dressed for the occasion. She wore a sleek navy dress that brought out her eyes, and I had on my best suit, ready for whatever Lisa had planned. The restaurant was as upscale as they came, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where you didn't see prices on the menu. We walked into the private dining room, and immediately, I knew something was off. Lisa and her friends were already seated at a large table, laughing and chatting like it was their personal playground. Every seat was filled. I scanned the room quickly. There was no chair for me. Not even an empty space where one could have been. Lisa saw us and waved, her smile wide and fake as ever. "David, Rachel, so glad you could make it." I glanced at Rachel, whose face flushed with embarrassment. She opened her mouth to speak, but Lisa beat her to it. "Oh, Rachel, I'm so sorry," Lisa said, her tone syrupy sweet. "I must have miscounted. We only have seats for 8. But don't worry, David can grab a spot at the bar. The cocktails here are divine." Rachel froze, caught between me and her friend, her expression a mix of anger and shame. I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm and even. "No need for the bar, Lisa. I'll take care of it." I turned and walked out of the room before Rachel could say anything, heading straight for the restaurant manager. He greeted me with a polite smile, but that smile widened when I introduced myself. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice filled with recognition. "It's an honor to meet you. How can I assist?" "I own this place," I said plainly. "There's a private party in your dining room that I need you to help me address." His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "Of course, sir. What do you need?" I told him what I wanted, and within minutes, the manager and I walked back into the private room. Lisa was mid-sentence, basking in the attention of her friends, when the manager interrupted. "Excuse me," he said, his tone professional yet firm. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This dining room is reserved for Mr. Thompson and his guests. I'll have to ask your party to vacate the space." The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. Lisa blinked, her confusion quickly morphing into indignation. "What are you talking about? I reserved this room weeks ago." The manager gestured toward me. "Mr. Thompson owns the restaurant. He's graciously offered to cover your bill tonight, but this space belongs to him." Lisa's face turned bright red, and she stammered, You own this place?" I nodded, my expression calm. "Yes, Lisa, I do. And it seems there was indeed a miscount tonight, just not the kind you were expecting." The others at the table looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances as they realized what had happened. Rachel, meanwhile, sat frozen, clearly mortified. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, turning to the manager, "please arrange another table for these guests, somewhere more suitable." The manager nodded, ushering Lisa and her group out of the room. As they left, Lisa shot me a look that could have melted steel, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned to Rachel, who was still sitting quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm sorry," she said softly, tears brimming in her eyes. "I didn't know she would do this." I sat down beside her, my voice gentle but firm. "Rachel, I know this is hard for you, but you have to see it for what it is. Lisa doesn't respect you, or us. This wasn't about a miscount. This was about control." She nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. "You're right. I didn't want to believe it." "I know," I said, reaching for her hand. "But we can't let people like Lisa dictate how we live our lives. You don't need her approval. You never did." Rachel looked at me, her expression filled with something I hadn't seen in a while, determination. "You're right. I'll talk to her. I'll make it clear that this can't continue." For the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. Lisa's games had gone too far, and while I knew she wouldn't give up easily, I also knew that Rachel and I were stronger together. As we finished our evening in the private dining room, just the two of us, I realized that this wasn't just a victory for me. It was a turning point for our marriage. And I wasn't about to let Lisa take that away from us. The fallout from the dinner at Lalivo was a turning point for Rachel and me. The ride home that night was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. I didn't push her to talk. I knew she needed time to process what had happened. Lisa's stunt had crossed every possible line, and for the first time, Rachel had seen it as clearly as I had. When we got home, Rachel finally broke the silence. She sat on the couch, her shoulders slumped, and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "David," she began softly, "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how much Lisa has been manipulating us." I sat down beside her, giving her the space to speak. She continued, her voice trembling. "I thought she was just being Lisa, you know, a little overbearing, a little bossy. But tonight, I saw it. She wasn't just trying to humiliate you. She was trying to make me choose, to prove that she could still control me." I nodded, letting her words sink in. "Rachel, I've been trying to tell you this, but I didn't want to push too hard. I know how much your friendships mean to you. But Lisa? She doesn't want what's best for you. She wants what's best for her, and she's willing to hurt anyone who stands in her way, even you." Rachel wiped her eyes, her expression shifting from sadness to resolve. "You're right. I see that now. And I'm done letting her do this. I'm done letting her make me feel small, or like I have to earn her approval. I don't need her in my life if it means sacrificing the respect we have for each other." Her words were like a weight lifting off my chest. For so long, I'd felt like I was fighting this battle alone. But now, Rachel was with me. She wasn't just apologizing. She was taking a stand. And for the first time, I truly believed that things could change. The next day, Rachel called Lisa. She didn't tell me exactly what was said, but when she hung up, she looked relieved. "It's done," she said simply. "I told her that her behavior was unacceptable and that I need space. If she can't respect me, or us, then there's no place for her in my life." I could see how hard that conversation had been for Rachel, but I was proud of her. She'd taken control, not just for me, but for herself. And in doing so, she'd set a boundary that Lisa couldn't cross. The weeks that followed felt like a breath of fresh air. Without Lisa's toxic influence hanging over us, Rachel and I grew closer. We started spending more time together, rediscovering the joy that had brought us together in the first place. Our evenings became lighter, filled with laughter and meaningful conversations. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, allowing us to see each other more clearly than ever. Social events with Rachel's other friends became more enjoyable too. Without Lisa dominating the dynamic, the group felt more relaxed and genuine. People who had once been hesitant to engage with me now opened up, and I found myself actually looking forward to these gatherings. It turned out that not everyone in Rachel's circle shared Lisa's toxic tendencies. They had just been overshadowed by her presence. One night, as we were getting ready for a party, Rachel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, adjusting her earrings, "I've been thinking about Lisa a lot lately. Not in a bad way, just reflecting." I raised an eyebrow. Reflecting? She nodded. I used to think she was this larger-than-life figure, someone I needed to impress to feel like I belonged. But now I see that she's just flawed. Insecure, maybe. She uses control and manipulation to mask her own fears. And while I don't excuse what she's done, I can't bring myself to hate her. I actually hope she finds her way. Her words surprised me, but they also reminded me why I fell in love with her. Rachel had always been compassionate, even in the face of hurt. You're a better person than most, I said, smiling. But don't forget, you're not responsible for fixing her. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. I know. She has to figure that out for herself. As we arrived at the party, I couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. The atmosphere was light, the conversations genuine, and for once, there was no underlying tension. Rachel was glowing, her laughter filling the room, and I felt a deep sense of pride knowing she had reclaimed her confidence. Toward the end of the night, one of Rachel's friends approached me. You know, she said, it's been really nice having you around lately. Without certain distractions, it's easier to see how great you and Rachel are together. I smiled, grateful for her words. Thanks. I think we're in a good place now. As we drove home that night, Rachel turned to me with a soft smile. I don't think I've ever been this happy, she said. Not just with us, but with everything. It feels peaceful. I reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. That's because we've found our balance. And no one, not Lisa, not anyone, can take that away from us. And that was the truth. Lisa's absence had been a gift in disguise, forcing us to confront the cracks in our relationship and come out stronger on the other side. While I couldn't say I wished her well with complete sincerity, I hoped she found the peace she needed, somewhere far away from us. For now, Rachel and I were content to enjoy the life we built together, free from toxicity and filled with mutual respect. We'd learned an important lesson. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't the ones we fight against others. They're the ones we fight within ourselves. And together, we'd won.